I'm using rough watercolour paper and I pre-drawn the picture with an HB pencil. So I'm mixing up some of the Hansa yellow lights. I'm starting off with all the lighter colours first, and I'm just adding a tiny touch of the phthalo blue here to make a really light green, and then adding a little bit more phthalo blue to make a medium green. So already I have three colours: yellow, light green and a mid green. So I've rinsed off my brush, get all that green off, and I'm using some of the Alizarin Crimson, just putting that on there, and I'm going to put a touch of the Pyrrole Orange in there as well. So it's a lovely warm red, and now I'm using the Alizarin Crimson on its own. They're quite creamy colours. Make sure you rinse your brush each time. So now I'm mixing up the Alizarin Crimson along with a touch of the yellow for a nice sort of dark orange sort of colour, really getting lots of variety of autumn colours here. Now I've got the Pyrrole Orange on its own, and I'm adding a touch of yellow to make quite a nice light orange. You can be quite sort of creative with these colours, choose your own, but I'm giving you a guide to how you can get this variety of autumnal colours. I've used a little bit of the burnt sienna there. It's a lovely colour, and here again I'm using some Quinacridone Gold as well, nice puddle of that. I'm wetting my paper now with my large brush. You can use a big mop brush or a flat brush. Just give everything a good soak. The longer you let that sort of water go into the membranes of the paper, it gives you more time when you paint wet on wet. I'm dropping in my lightest colours first, so I'm really looking at that reference photograph, sort of judging where all those light areas are. So I'm just using the yellow on its own, using my size 6 brush, painting wet in wet. And I like to use the paint sort of slightly dilute but also a bit creamier, especially in the foreground there where the yellow is so strong. I'm just dropping in the orange now towards the back of the grasses, wet into wet again, still sticking with that size 6 brush. And the reason why I'm using it is sometimes a larger brush almost puts too much paint on, and I want these sort of areas of colours like the orange or the yellow, keeping them a little bit separate, so that smaller brush gives me that control. At the same time though, these brushes, black velvet brushes, really do hold so much paint and have such gorgeous points, so it really gives me that control, but at the same time I get that sort of accuracy as well. So as you can see, my brush is dancing all around this paper, dropping in the lighter colours, the yellows, the oranges. There's so much orange light in those bushes on the right hand side there, and I really want to capture that, painting damp into wet almost. This colour is quite creamy, quite opaque almost, and I'm just dropping it in there, here and there, really having fun with it. Remember to keep rinsing your brush when you change your colours. Sorry that colour's off camera. It is Quinacridone Gold plus a little bit of the Phthalo Blue, and I'm painting this damp into wet or wet into wet. I'm really trying to look at the reference photograph and really trying to interpret what I see. I want to work light to dark, wet into wet to begin with, to get these soft edges so they go back, and later on I'll work wet on dry, building up my tonal values to create the depth in the watercolour painting. That's why I love watercolours so much. So I'm putting on these light to mid greens, working in that left hand side of the painting where there's a lot more of that sort of warmish green colour, and I've decided now to paint this sort of middle tree. It's quite a bright green, and I'm using the Phthalo Blue plus the Hansa yellow lights. You could use Prussian blue and lemon yellow, and I'm just painting that wet into wet, and now dropping in a slightly richer green. It's more Phthalo Blue, less yellow, wet into wet. Remember to keep rinsing your brush and changing your water. What I'm doing here is, because the paint's run up into the sky because that's wet, I'm just softening it and blending it so it almost gives a yellow glow in the sky. The painting is all nice and damp. I'm dropping in now a little bit of the orange and the crimson, those colours that I made earlier, trying to keep a little bit of variety. On the right hand side of that tree there's more of an orange glow, so I've tried to capture that, painting this wet in wet with my size 6 brush. try to have fun with this. If all else fails and it goes wrong, just put it under the tap, wash it off, make some more colours and start again. You can't go wrong with this. Just, you know, try to be creative. These colours are gorgeous. They're just joyful, aren't they? So I'm painting in some of the lovely orangey glow next to that green tree on the left there, and I've added a little bit of burnt sienna because there's a nice earthy sort of colour there as well. So dropping this in wet, size 6 brush, really trying to create those shapes in there. Obviously it's wet and it kind of spreads a little bit, but you want to sort of create those patches, and I'm putting a little bit of a stronger colour here with the crimson and some burnt sienna mixed together, slightly creamier so it doesn't run as much. So the thicker the paint, the more it stays still. The wetter the paint, the more it spreads when you're painting on a damp surface. A painting like this, you can really learn a lot about watercolour painting, you know, not just the colour mixing, but the wet in wet, the damp into wet, what it does, and being aware of what your surface is like. How damp is it? Is it drying off a little bit? What I've used there is some beautiful Quinacridone Gold with a bit of burnt sienna and orange. It's quite more of a natural looking colour, and I'm mixing in a little bit of a creamier colour here with a yellow, tiny touch of blue, a lot of Quinacridone Gold. You can really sort of vary it, that sort of more of a neutral, natural looking lighter yellow green. So I've just put my framing tape behind my painting to give it a little bit of tilt because the colours were just running up into the sky too much. So I'm just using the tissue as well to take that paint off, to get the control back. So now I'm painting on a little bit of a tilt, so just beware the paint. Now you can see it starts to run down towards the bottom of the paper, but you can actually tilt back again later if it's too much. So just judge where it is. It's just to stop running it into the sky a little bit. I'm putting on some really creamy orange now on that background, just that background grasses, and some really creamy yellow on the foreground. I want to really capture that light. Aren't those colours stunning? So I'm mixing up a bit of phthalo blue there with some yellow, creamy, really creamy, and putting in that light green grasses in that foreground there, damp into damp, and letting that sort of colour glow as it were, and really sort of trying to create that richness, and dropping that same colour here and there in the foliage of the trees. This is a little bit of crimson with a bit of phthalo blue, and I'm painting now the darks in that background. You can add a bit of burnt sienna to this to really create a rich dark. Make sure it's nice and creamy, because otherwise it'll run too much into all your lovely foliage. I'm tilting the painting to the side to stop it running up and running down. It's just to get a little bit of control with this dark colour, and I'm using my size 6 brush. So that's really, you know, really get those shapes in there. These darks are really important. Don't be afraid of the dark. I've mixed up a little bit of Quinacridone Gold, touch of orange, touch of burnt sienna for some of these warm darker browns to the left here, dropping them in wet into wet or damp into wet, depending on what your painting is doing. I added a little bit of green in there into that brown just to create a little bit more of a neutral brown, just bringing it down to the bushes and just sort of varying those darks a little so they're not all the same. I've added a little bit of burnt sienna to that dark and just putting rich browns in there. So I mean, there's lots of colour mixing here. I don't want you to be overwhelmed by it. You know, just put those darks in, but you've got your greens and your oranges, your yellows, and you can vary them, make those sort of more neutral, softer greens, and just play, but keep those zones. Don't worry too much if you can't get them exactly like mine. Just get those sort of different, sort of the more crimson tree, a green tree, orange and yellows, and then just get your darks and try to keep it simple. Don't be overwhelmed and don't worry, you know, just have fun. I'm just sprinkling a little bit of sea salt on here, but you could use table salt. The paint is damp and I'm going to let it dry naturally. So what happens is it lifts off some of the paint and creates some nice textures. Once it's dry, just brush it off with some kitchen towel and it reveals some lovely textures. You may lose some of those textures when you start sponging, but that doesn't matter. It's sometimes you can keep them, and it's all quite random, but I always just like doing it because it gets me started with all this lovely texture. So we've got the colour underneath and the light colours. Now we're going to build up some tonal values and textures. So what I've done here is I've mixed up some dark greens using browns and blues. I'm making that sort of dark crimson colour using the crimson and burnt sienna, and just make sure all these colours, you've got lots of them and they're lovely and creamy consistency. So just bear in mind you're using the same colours you used earlier, just adding some more darker colours to them, like the blue and the browns, to make them richer and darker in value. It's amazing actually just putting another layer even of the same colour tone that you used earlier, and it will immediately be darker in watercolour because you're actually covering that light of the paper each time. So you can think of it as coloured pieces of glass, one put on top of the other, and each time you're stopping the light of the paper getting through. So what I'm doing here is I'm sponging on that rich crimson shade with a touch of the burnt sienna and tapping very gently with my damp sponge. It's a natural sponge, but I'm actually going to show you different sponges you can use to create different textures as well, especially for those of you that don't have a natural sponge. It's really important to tap gently, but also to leave gaps. You don't want to be sponging over everything. Leave some of that salt texture and some of the lighter areas. So I'm just sponging on a little bit of the green now. That's the Phthalo Blue. You could have Quinacridone Gold or the Hansa Yellow Light. I'm rinsing my sponge now. I'm putting it to one side. Now this is just a kitchen scourer. Okay, it's quite tough to tear. The reason why I'm tearing it, so you've got some nice natural edges, and I don't want you to cut it because you're going to have a square edge. So I'm using the bit where I tore it and pressing down there again gently, and you get some nice textures. Personally, I prefer the natural sponge, but you do get something out of this, and the more you use these, the more you train it to give you better textures. Now I'm using a car sponge. It's a synthetic large car sponge. I've torn it as well, not cut it, and I've wet it as well and wrung the water out so it's damp, and then I'll put the paint on, and again I'm tapping on. I actually find this a little bit better than the scourer, and I'm just tapping on these colours now, and I'm getting some really nice textures. I'm pretty pleased with that, and you think about it, you can get about 20 sponges out of this car sponge. Just remember just to tear it at angles so you get all these lovely textures on the sponge. Don't cut it. I'm just tapping in now some of the orange colours to create some lovely textures there, taking my time, and even putting some of the reddy orangey textures in these background bushes there. Remember, try to keep your light as well and any of the interesting salt effects that you've created. Once you've finished with the sponging, if you feel it's a little bit too textured, I'm using my spritzer bottle just to soften them and let the colours blend a little bit. Don't over wet this, but it's just to create a little bit of softness, and I'm going to let it dry naturally. As you can see, there's some nice soft areas there as well as the texture. I'm painting the light areas on the tree trunk using some yellow and orange. So it's a really nice warm light on the right hand side of these tree trunks. Take your time and just add the yellow and the orange and sort of vary maybe the light colours. So I've made these areas slightly stronger, and I'm bringing this, making the tree trunk of this crimson tree, bring it down nearer to the bottom of the painting so it looks closer. And I'm just putting a little bit now on these distant trees here, making the lines a little bit smaller, a touch paler so they look further away. I've mixed up some indigo and I'm going to put in some burnt sienna, so it's a nice creamy rich dark colour. I'm painting the left hand side of the trees, wet on dry, but letting that sort of the right hand side of that dark paint run a little bit into the orange. If it doesn't run as well as you want it to, just blend it a little bit with your brush as well, but try to keep that orange on the right hand side of the tree. As you saw there, I was painting delicately my branches going up, the lower branches going up into the tree as well, sort of really branching them out using the same colours, the burnt sienna with a touch of indigo. I've just used my tissue there just to take off a little bit of colour because I felt it was coming forward too much. So just be aware of the tonal value. You look at my two trees on the right, they're stronger and they come forward. I've mixed up a little bit of the phthalo blue, a touch of the yellow, and I'm just mixing up a cream creamy colour here, a little bit more phthalo blue. I'm really trying to get the right colour here. I want to paint a shadow colour for the trees. So I'm just mixing up a little bit of burnt sienna there. So it's like a sludgy green, and I'm just painting this wet on dry, starting with this further tree using my size 10 brush. So it's really fully loaded, and I'm just trying to put this delicate sort of line going across these grasses, keeping it quite thin, but just taking my time. And I'm painting this now under the next tree, just working my way down. Try to keep this in direct line with the tree that you're painting, and try to keep the lines parallel. Remember, take your time, don't rush. This is a nice bit. The paper's very rough, so I've just sort of pulled my size 10 brush from left to right across the paper, and where you've got that lovely dry brush effect, I left it. I thought it gave it a little bit of a look of dappled light, really lovely sort of textured effect. I'm mixing up some of the phthalo blue again with a touch of the burnt sienna, and just pulling that wash across, really sort of, you know, from left to right, trying to carefully go around those trees there. There's a lovely lighter green sort of shadow in the foreground, so I'm mixing up some of the phthalo turquoise and some of the yellow, and just painting that just at the bottom of that shadow in the middle to really capture those colours, those colourful shadows in the foreground. And you can see the way you can get dry brush effect is really pull your brush quite quickly across your textured paper. So don't try and fill in every mark. Sometimes it's what you leave out in watercolour painting that can be so effective. Once you finish painting those shadow areas in the grass, I decided I was going to use some quite creamy Hansa yellow light and spatter some of this on that hedge, on those hedges in the distance, to create some sort of sparkly light. And sometimes when you feel like you've lost your light, you can actually use quite a creamy yellow to get some of that light back. And I'm painting now the smaller branches in with my size 2 brush, and I'm using burnt sienna with a touch of indigo. It's slightly watered down with these smaller branches. I don't want to make them as dark, and as you can see, I'm leaving little gaps here and there where so there's a little bit of foliage, so you can just see the branches going in and out of the foliage. It's quite a nice little technique to do, so take your time. You know, one great thing about painting branches, if someone's at the door or the kettle's just boiled, you can just stop, put your brush down and just go and see to it. Whereas obviously when you're doing a wet and wet wash or painting a sky, you want to be sort of totally uninterrupted. So it's quite relaxing. I've mixed up a really kind of more dilute colour here. I've used some indigo, some yellow and a little bit of brown, and I'm watering it down so it's kind of a sludgy sort of muddy sort of colour. And I'm just putting this slightly more dilute colour on these trees so they look like they're smaller faded branches behind these main sort of branches, and I tend to paint them a little bit quicker so it's nice and loose. Remember, you can actually turn your painting upside down as well if it makes it easier. So as you can see here, I'm just putting these long sort of marks here with my size 2 brush, wet on dry, nice and quick, so it just gives that impression of branches in the background. Just mixed up a sludgy sort of green, some blue, some yellow, some indigo, and I'm painting some of the larger tree trunks and branches in here to the left. It's amazing. I almost got lost in all these branches and things like that. Just take your time with this, you know, spend as long as you like. I've slightly diluted down the colours here and there, but also the larger branches you can paint the darker tones in, and just put as much detail as you want to do. I've swapped now to my twig using this dark, and this twig I've actually sharpened with a craft knife, so it's really got a lovely sort of very small point, and as I dip it into the paint and then paint with it, it's got a lovely feeling. I can really sort of let go and just paint these smaller branches in. I feel it feels very free to do, feels very natural. I'm painting twigs with a twig. It just seems to work. If you like, you can blow dry your painting before you do this next stage, and what I'm putting on now is I'm sponging on some of the dark shades using the indigo with a touch of the crimson, and I'm only putting it on here and there to create these sort of shadow areas on this foreground tree. Remember, press very gently, don't press too hard, and I'm just going to build up some of the tonal values here and there on the foliage using just the leftover paint. But on this right hand side there's a little bit of green and brown watered down mixed together, just using my sponge and tapping really gently. And I'm just getting a really lush dark green here and just putting some shadow colours on there. You can use the indigo and yellow, or the phthalo blue and the quinacridone gold, and just sort of vary it really. Just get those yummy darks in here and there. And I'm putting it over on the left hand side here as well, just to get a variety of textured marks and tonal marks. As you can see, I'm mixing everything with my sponge on the palette, get some lovely darks on those hedges to create some lovely dark textures. What really stops me from fiddling is a little spatter, and I thought I'd just give a little spatter in the foreground there, because that in the reference photograph there's so much yellow light, so I just thought I'd give a little spatter here and there, again over the tree area and the distant hedges as well. So this is a really sort of milky yellow. You could use orange as well. I had a little blob there. I've diluted the blob and I've taken it off with my kitchen towel, and it's amazing how the paint comes off so easily when you dilute it. I've actually got some fresh water and I'm wetting my sky area with my size 10 brush just above the trees there, being careful not to touch the trees. In the photograph there is no blue sky, but I decided I thought it may improve the painting by putting a little bit of a cloudy blue sky. So I'm just using some dilute ultramarine and painting it on with my size 10 brush, just keeping the sort of stronger blue at the top and just fading it a little bit to finish off my painting. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you would like to support the content that I create here on YouTube, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? You'll get access to longer, more in-depth tutorials that are ad-free, where you will also be able to download outline sketches. Details about that can be found in the description below.